You're watching all the build-up and reaction St Johnstone Celtic in the Scottish Cup semi-final.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Locker Room. It is on Independence Live. It is of course a Scottish Cup special. Sorry we did not have a preview show earlier. We had a few difficulties, so we thought we'd come on after the game and discuss Celtic's, let's be honest, dominant display against St Johnstone. It finished 5-0. The Celtic goals come from Callum McGregor, Adiza Maeda double, Adam Ida and Jota getting the last goal, 67th minute. I'm Robbie and we are joined by Ethan. Ethan, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. As you said, a dominant performance from Celtic. I think they referenced it on commentary, but I was thinking it before they said it, much like the League Cup semi-final against Aberdeen. Aberdeen obviously got that positive result at Celtic Park earlier in the season. Celtic sort of take the revenge out in dramatic fashion after St Johnstone obviously got that massive win at McDermott Park a few weeks ago. Yeah, how's yourself?
Yeah, not bad. Enjoyed a good weekend of football. Obviously, yesterday was a pretty entertaining cup game, to be fair, between Aberdeen and Hearts. And I sort of thought, although I said in the show on Friday, I was more inclined to maybe give St Johnstone a chance. I thought they'd make it difficult for Celtic. I didn't think it'd be 5, to be honest. But I was just more impressed with how Celtic played. I thought they were dominant for the first whistle and got the deserved win. Before we get into talking about the actual game, the team sheet. Stacey Allen goals, a back four, Johnston, Carter, Vickers, Scales, Taylor, Engels, McGregor and Hatate in the midfield, Forrest on the right, Maeda on the left and Ida through the middle. What were your sort of thoughts, Ethan, on that team sheet when it got announced?
I think it was one that surprised me, but at the same time didn't. I think Brendan Rodgers, he's obviously made no changes from the team that played so well last week against Kilmarnock, because Celtic going through a little bit of a slump in the season, but they got that great win last week with some great goals, scored loads of goals in a quick period, and it was the same again today. So I think you can sort of say he got it right. But obviously it shows the quality Celtic have against the likes of St Johnstone when you've got the likes of like McCowan, Paulo Bernardo, Nicholas Cood and Jota all coming off the bench. So it makes it really difficult for St Johnstone. But yeah, I think Rodgers obviously got it right based on the scoreline.
Aye, it was quite intriguing to look at St Johnston's lineup. They had, I think it was Carey, Clark and Sidibe starting. And I was sort of thinking, when Cincy Allo's in goal, and I don't think he's a bad goalkeeper. I think he actually had a good game. He made a very good save. I think it was Mackenzie Kirk in the second half around about the 50th minute mark. Pulled off a fantastic save. But I was interested to see what sort of St Johnston's attack would do in that game because, Gale's being in there again. We know how good Carter Vickers and Scales are when they play with each other. So I was sort of looking at St Johnston's attack, Ethan, and thinking, could they cause Celtic a wee bit of bother?
Yeah, they obviously played very well against Celtic a fortnight ago in that win. And you thought Valakari might go to a very similar setup to that. Obviously, it's a different stage at Hampden, but he made a few tweaks. I don't know if they were forced through injury. I'm trying to work that out right now.
Yeah, there was a few that I know there was a few centre backs that I think Alistair spoke on the show on Friday and said that there was quite a lot of centre back injuries.
Yeah, Dre Wright is one that obviously didn't play. Yeah, he's injured. So that's kind of forced upon Valakari. But yeah, it just really was an off day for St Johnstone. I know Celtic, some of the goals were really good play, but St Johnstone helped them on a few of them. The fourth one especially comes to mind. And even the first goal, I know it's brilliant play to the build up to get the ball to McGregor, but I think McGregor from a 15 to 25 yard sort of distance, you're not wanting to have him having a shooting effort from there because I think that's where I think 10 now of his goals have come this season. So yeah, that was, but obviously Celtic have got quality and it's difficult for St Johnstone.
Yeah, just before we get into the game, just quickly, we will be back live on Tuesday, doing a special show about fan access and football grounds for disabled supporters, where we'll be joined by John Attenborough. So make sure you come and check that out at 7:30. But even the first sort of 10 minutes of the game, I was surprised. I expected a lot. I think I expected a lot more pressure off of Celtic. St Johnstone, I mean, look, it can be a good thing and a bad thing what Valakari done. He set up that St Johnstone weren't just dropping deep. He wanted them to stay high up the pitch and try and press Celtic, which not many managers do. It's the classic, you can play against Celtic and Rangers and you just drop everybody back straight away. But I think Valakari fancied his chances the first 10 minutes. And to be honest, I think St Johnstone got off to a pretty decent start. They didn't create much, but what they did do was sort of force Celtic back to, playing it around the back.
Yeah, I think for a team like St Johnstone, when you're playing against the likes of Celtic, you've got to take the game in stages. And for the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, they were still well in the game, nothing each. And they forced Celtic to not much. I think Celtic were played a lot better than what they did at McDermott Park a few weeks ago, but they still didn't create a lot of clear-cut chances, which would be a good sign for Valakari. And as you said, they went very aggressive. They went almost man for man, which can either go very well and you turn the ball over in possession, or it can go very poorly. I think back to another game relating to Celtic, where Celtic went obviously man for man as they do with every team in the league against St Johnstone before Valakari in that game that I think was 6-0, I think it was, before they played Borussia Dortmund, and then they went to Borussia Dortmund, done the same thing, and Borussia Dortmund made Celtic look silly. So that's the kind of things that can happen when you play against a team with a different quality of player, and that's what happened eventually. But St Johnstone did start the game well, but it was just that flurry, that 10-minute flurry before half-time that really seen Celtic end the game, really, as they did last week against Kilmarnock.
Yeah, one thing I noticed on the St Johnstone end was, although they started off very well, they also get tired very quickly. I think it was Balladis at the back. I noticed he was looking quite tired very early on in the game. I think that's the problem when, it's a St Johnstone type of team. Yes, they don't play all week, but when you get into a game against Celtic and it's so high intensity and it's high pressing, aggressive, quick passing, it can really make you tired. And I noticed, one player that I think stood out to me in the Celtic end, especially the first half, was James Forrest. He's lightning pace. He's just drifting in and out of defenders. He's making it difficult for St Johnstone. I thought the first 20, 30 minutes especially, but it was a real handful for the St Johnstone team.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to see because James Forrest's obviously been about the Scottish game for a while, and you keep thinking his time's going to come to an end, but here he is still contributing. I know he's still not scored yet this season, but as you said, I thought his overall play in the game was pretty good. And you don't always need to be scoring or getting assists to have a great impact. And I thought he did that, and I thought the whole of the Celtic team did that. Even Adam Ida was getting involved a lot more than he usually does. And he obviously got that goal as well, which I think you've seen him apologising to the Celtic fans, if anyone's seen what he was up to during the week. But yeah, I think that's all been ironed out now. But between him and Brendan Rodgers, but he would have loved to sort of score and silence the critics, if you could say that.
Yeah, I think the only thing Celtic were maybe missing at the first 20 minutes was a goal, obviously. There was a couple of slack shots. I know Engels had one that went straight at Fisher. And I think I was quite intrigued with this game. Obviously, last time that Johnson played Celtic, Celtic couldn't find the breakthrough on Fisher. So looking into this game, I was intrigued with the Maeda, Forrest. I was interesting to see, can they actually get through Fisher? And I've got to say, after the first half an hour, I wasn't so confident that they would. Fisher, he didn't have much to do, but everything that Celtic were flinging at him sort of just went straight into his hands.
Yeah, and that was a bit like the game a fortnight ago. Although Celtic had a lot of the shots and a lot of the possession, there wasn't really any point where you thought, oh, St Johnstone are really under the cosh here, they're going to concede. It was a bit of the same, but Celtic got that couple of yards created, and they obviously found the opening.
Aye, Brian says, so on the 35th anniversary of the highest scoring Scottish Cup final of all time, it is a repeat of the same two teams. Memories of Theo Snelders and Brian Irvin. Brian, thank you so much for your comment. Celtic did get the breakthrough eventually. It was through Callum McGregor. Was it Callum McGregor? Did he get the
Yeah,
first?
it was Callum McGregor, yeah, right.
Yeah, McGregor get the first. Lovely bit of play through the right, through James Forrest, plays into Rio Hatate. Hatate sort of turns away from his man, plays a lovely back heel to McGregor. And I know what you're saying, Ethan. You know, St Johnstone cannot give Celtic that kind of space, and they cannot give Callum McGregor that kind of space in the edge of the box. They sort of try to stay off him too much, try and put in the block, but for McGregor, it's an easy enough finish.
Yeah, we've seen him. I think no one would sort of disagree that he's the best sort of range shooter from that sort of range, the edge of the box. I mean, I think all of his goals have came from either just inside the box or outside the box. And yeah, it's difficult because Rio Hatate sort of manipulates the defenders well, and then he sort of just lays it all for the back heel. McGregor takes a few touches, and none of the St Johnstone players can get close enough. It's almost like a pass into the bottom corner, much like he done against Rangers in the Scottish Cup. I think that was 2017, maybe. So thinking a wee bit back, and of course we'll have the Scottish Cup final recreated this season. So it's a weird coincidence that I've come up with there. But yeah, it was a really well taken goal from McGregor. And it was Celtic would have loved to get that at that time because, as we said, they didn't have much clear-cut chances, and it was just a bit of quality from Hatate and McGregor and from Forrest as well that created the goal.
Yeah, I think although Celtic will be, glad with the way the goal dated, and Rodgers will be glad as well, with how swift and quick Celtic moved through the team. It was really avoidable for St Johnstone. The ball, I think, was with Fisher before Celtic come on the attack, and he just sort of lumps it long straight into the middle of the pitch. I think it landed at Johnston, who started it to Forrest. Stuff like that's really avoidable for St Johnstone. Early in the game, you're seeing them try to pass it around the back and then maybe go long, but as soon as Fisher gets the ball on this chance, he just sort of lumps up the park, and it's something that is never going to really work in your favour when you're playing Celtic and Rangers.
Yeah, sometimes I think people prefer their goalkeepers to just get rid of the ball and try and be cute with it. But on this occasion, Fisher, I like Fisher. I think he's been a good addition to St Johnstone, but I don't think it was the best sort of clearance, the best area to clear into. For St Johnstone, that moment you've got to buy yourself time because, as you said, the players will tire off the back of, although not the sort of chance after chance, but the sort of passing and moving, the pressure that Celtic created. But yeah, as you said, Celtic turned it over well, and then obviously created the chance well for McGregor, and you probably wouldn't really have anyone else in that position.
Yeah, and let's be honest, it was quite a high heat as well. I don't think players that play in Scotland often sort of expect this kind of heat. It was really warm today and around Glasgow, so that would have been hard for the St Johnstone players as well. But Celtic made it 2-0 just 3 minutes later. McGregor burst forward. He plays a lovely through ball. I think it was cut at the back for St Johnstone, tries to cut it out, but he can't quite get it away, and it falls to Maeda. And I love the type of goals, Ethan. It's a through ball. It's a very tidy finish for Maeda, and already you're looking at that and going, is that game over already? Because Celtic just looked like they could have scored about another 5 or 6 if that first half kept going.
Yeah, it's almost as like I like to compare this saying. I always use this saying with yellow cards. It's like the seal is broken. Once the first goal went in, then the second, you just worried for St Johnstone because it was just kind of heading that way. I think it was a really great ball from Carter Vickers initially. He sort of breaks the press of St Johnstone, gets into Ida, who, like I said, involved himself well without out with the goal. Lays it off for McGregor, who obviously makes that sort of drive and run that you associate with him. Celtic get a little bit lucky that Curtis can't quite deal with it, and then Maeda's alert, and it's a really good finish. And it's just Isaac Maeda scoring again, which I think we've grown used to this season.
Yeah, Brian also comments, did St Johnstone get a goal disallowed last Scott update? I saw it for yes, Mackenzie Kirk did score a very nice goal. We'll go into that later, and that did get disallowed. How big a game do you think this was for you? Because also we can get into his goal later, but coming into this game, there has been a lot of criticism on him this season. People don't think he was worth that money that Celtic paid, and all the rest of it. But you're right, in this game, it was dropping deeper. I love it when I think that's becoming, part of the modern game. I don't think strikers are so much number nines anymore, out and out. They do come back and hold up play. I watch it in my team, I watch Mandron Junga do it 38 games a season. How big how good do you think it was that Ida got off to this good start? He was holding up the ball well, he was creating stuff, not just, for himself, but for other players on the team.
Yeah, I think he does had obviously in his last season on loan. I think almost everything went brilliant for him. He got some big goals. The double against Motherwell, and obviously the goal to win the Scottish Cup. And I think 9.5 million or whatever it was quite a steep payment for him. But you've got to remember, I think he is still quite a young player. He's not young enough where you can sort of take the pressure off him, but he's young enough that he's still got time to develop as a player. But yeah, it was definitely great for him to have a positive contribution, obviously get that goal, because he's had a difficult spell this season. A lot of critics, a lot of people saying he's not good enough for Celtic. I think he's definitely shown in parts that he is good enough for Celtic. I think it's 15 goals this season. For a Celtic striker, it's obviously not the best tally, but I think there's still room for growth for him. And I think the point where he became the best last season was in that sort of final dart towards the end of the season. Obviously, last season it was the split games meant a lot more than it does this season because the league's almost wrapped up. But he'll still have a big part to play in the remainder of the season, and with the likes of Jota and Nicholas Kuhn maybe not playing their best stuff. I know Jota scored today, but not playing their best stuff that they can. It allows him to get the starts, and I think he can definitely push. He's definitely still in contention. Obviously, he started, and I think he wants to be in that sort of, when it comes to the Champions League qualifiers, the Champions League games, the biggest games of the season. He wants to be the sort of striker. And he thought that he was going to be that when Kyogo left. Didn't quite work out that way, but he's got that starting role now, and I think he'll keep it going into the Dundee United game next week.
Yeah, and I think that's always the thing, Celtic fans are so used to over the last few seasons seeing a guy like Kyogo who is more a, old school 9 and 9, number 9, playing through the middle and scoring the goals. But do you think it's just a case of Celtic fans, maybe need to get used to this sort of modern way a striker's playing now? It is going to be much more either drop him in, try to create chances for the whole team instead of, him scoring all the goals.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, if you're a striker who's scoring, I don't know, Erling Haaland amounts of goals. I know he's not been his usual self this season, but if he scores the amount of goals that he does, then you kind of say, right, you don't need to be involved in the build-up. You just stand in the box and score the goals, because that is most of the time what Erling Haaland does. But unless you're that, then you want your striker to get involved, drop deep, drag defenders out of position. And I think that's what Adam Idah done today, and I think that's what he needs to do. And I think the goals will come for him. I think he's got the attributes to be a top striker at Celtic. I know it's not quite all went his way this season, but I think that the fans, with him amongst a few players, need to give them a chance, because I think Celtic fans in general, towards the end of this season and the last few stretches after the loss at Rangers, the loss at home to Rangers, the loss at McDermott Park, I think there was a few sort of, he's not good enough to play for Celtic, X, Y, and Z. But I think most of the players have shown over the course of the season that they are good enough to play for Celtic, and they will be here beyond the summer.
Yeah, and I think the thing is as well, I see it with my own club, unless you are a top striker like a Haaland or Isak or, someone like Mbappe over in La Liga, you're never going to be that guy, that number 9 that scores a lot of goals. It just doesn't harm that these days in football. So I think to be able to utilise a striker, that's really good. But, as we were approaching for half time in this game, I sort of thought it would be 2-0 going into the break. Celtic just picked it up again. It was a really nice run actually for Hatate, and he plays it across the byline that falls to Adamida, who grabs himself a tap-in. Just on this goal, one player in particular that has also received a lot of criticism, especially after the game at McDermott Park, Rio Hatate, he picked himself up 3 assists in this game. How big was it for him to have a good game as well? Because I think he is a good player. After McDermott Park, there was a lot of criticism online about him and maybe his future at Celtic. But you've got to say he had a very good game. You know, the way he was making runs in behind, he was getting the midfield at a horrible the St Johnstone midfield, sorry, at a horrible time.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was definitely a candidate for man of the match today, and I think for one that watches Celtic a lot, I think Rio Hatate on his day when he plays at his very best, he's one of the best players in the league. I think he was the best player when Celtic probably reached their peak this season against RB Leipzig in that win at home. I think he was the best player on that day, and I think when he plays at his best, Celtic are a different animal, and you've seen that today. The only thing is his best doesn't come as regular or as consistent as you'd like. He's not like Callum McGregor where you get a solid 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 every game. Hatate usually either the best player on the pitch or the worst player on the pitch sometimes. But I think that's maybe why he's still at Celtic. He's not got all that big move to the sort of Premier League team, is because clubs see him as someone who, yes, he's got immense quality, and you see that in some of the goals he scored, the goal last week, and some of the passes he made, the pass against Young Boys to qualify Celtic to the knockouts of the Champions League. He's got that sort of quality, but it just doesn't always show. But I think you see that players definitely show their recognition for him because obviously he got voted in the team of the season. I don't know if I would have had him in the team of the season personally myself, but he's got 10 goals and 10 assists this season, which for a central midfielder number 8 is a pretty good return. So I think he was very, very good today, and it was good for him to get the sort of, like Adamida, get the fans off his back, because that's what performances like today's does.
Yeah, I think that's maybe why someone like a Matt O'Reilly gets moved into the Premier League. He can be so consistent, and like that's no putting any disrespect towards Hatate because I think he is a good player, as you said. The record speaks for itself, and I think it was interesting. I think it was Andy Halliday on Saturday, Super Scoreboard, sort of speaking about the team of the season picks, and Andy sort of explained as a midfielder himself, how difficult it is playing against someone like Rio Hatate, someone that is so smart. Yes, it might not be the most consistent, but if you watch, if you had a camera on only him for a game, you'd see how smart he is about, the way the game's played. He doesn't just try anything for the sake of it, he really does try and pick out the perfect pass.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the times why I think Joe Hart might have spoken this on one of his gigs on the commentary for the Champions League games, that Hatate sometimes doesn't have the best games is because he's always looking for the sort of pass forward. When some players would maybe turn around and pass it backwards, he's the one who's looking for that line breaking pass that's gonna create a goal. And sometimes he gets caught on the ball a lot as well because of that. But when he's playing in his fluent best, he's pretty unstoppable. He's one of the best players in the league, I'd say. And I'd say that on his day at Celtic, he's got a higher sort of ceiling than even a player like Matt O'Reilly. I think Matt O'Reilly, brilliant season last season. I mean, a ridiculous goal tally for a midfielder. But I think both of them playing at their absolute best, I'd say Rio Hatate can reach a higher level, but I just don't think he will do because I think he's too inconsistent. But that also benefits Celtic, as in that no other team wants him, so Celtic get those days where he is just an unbelievable footballer.
Yeah, by this point, let's be honest, the game was over. Rodgers was pointing to the sky, he was celebrating, he looked so happy, and I actually felt glad for Rodgers because, again, this is a guy that's came back to Celtic, not even any Celtic, there's a lot of Celtic fans that don't even like him still for, the way he left and stuff. But for me, just watching a manager that's, clearly this is a guy that's got expectations of a treble every season. This is the main priority for Celtic fans. So to have the game plan go so right, be so comfortable, and knowing that you've basically got one hand on the Scottish Cup final anyway, it was really good to see Rodgers look so happy.
Yeah, and I think Brendan Rodgers over the last few weeks, over the last maybe month or two, there's been shouts that if he's going to go, Brendan Rodgers, because obviously he's only got 1 year left on his deal, and there's no sort of concreteness behind the fact that he might leave after that. And I think a lot of Celtic fans have been like, "Oh well, if he goes, he goes. If he goes after this season, he goes. We'll replace him." But I think he's the victim of his own success in a way. He's became a sort of manager where winning trebles. I know Celtic haven't won the treble yet, but they're obviously massive favourites. He's became sort of where Brendan Rodgers at Celtic. I know he didn't win one last season, but Brendan Rodgers at Celtic trebles, and that's what you associate him with. And over the recent seasons, I think Celtic fans have grown too used to that, and the fact that they think we'll get someone else in and they'll do the same. It doesn't always work like that, and I think he'll be delighted because he's been posed questions after the St Johnstone result, and I think he would have loved to sort of say, right, St Johnstone, you got your win the other week, but this is us at our best, and this is where we are, and this is where you are, kind of thing. And I think that's the kind of mentality that he sort of gives these players. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, I think that was the same with the Aberdeen game earlier in the season. But yeah, a massive result for Rodgers as well, and he would have loved that more than anyone probably.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. Don't Celtic fans take for granted how good Rodgers is. It's fine Rodgers leaving and getting a guy like Ange, who a top manager. By the way, I know he's struggling right now with Spurs, but I still believe he is a top manager. You're never going to get someone like an Ange every time. You could end up with a guy, like Giovanni, who, yes, people can say, he should have stayed at Rangers, whatever, but at the end of the day, Giovanni, Michael Beale, Philippe Clement, they all weren't good enough for Rangers. So, Celtic fans, enjoy Brendan Rodgers while you've got him, because yes, it won't be there forever. And you never know who the next appointment could be. It could be a guy coming in with the same reputation and you maybe don't know too much about him, and it could go the complete other way, and it might not work. So I think Celtic fans need to enjoy Brendan Rodgers while they have him.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen a lot of as well, get rid of Brendan Rodgers and get in Knudsen, I think it is. I don't know how you say his name, the Bodo Glimt manager. He's obviously been doing brilliant out there for a few seasons now. Obviously beat Ange Postecoglou's Celtic in the Conference League. And obviously they've reached a Europa League semi-final, which is a ridiculous achievement for a club in a league of their size. But even if he was to come to Celtic, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to work out the same way it did for Brendan Rodgers, the same way it did for Ange Postecoglou, because things just don't always work like that. And yeah, as you said, Celtic fans need to be grateful. That Ben Rodgers is the manager, and they shouldn't take it for granted.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to claim that, I watch the Norwegian league a lot, but it is very different to Scottish football. I've watched Brann play us twice. It's a much more physical league. I know Celtic have had success in the past, a few years ago now, against some of these teams, and that's fine. But a manager coming into a league that, the Scottish league, it's very different to a lot of other leagues in the world. It doesn't always work with managers, and that's why I look at a guy like Philippe Clement, and yes, I still think Philippe Clement is a more than capable manager in certain leagues. But when you're coming into the Scottish league, it doesn't quite work the same as a Norwegian league or a French league. It's very different.
Yeah, it's the same with players as well. I think I seen a post from an English person sort of undermining the Scottish league because of Sam Dalby's success this season. And it was sort of look at what he's done at these X, Y, and Z clubs in England, and look at what he's doing at Dundee United now. But players flourish in different environments. I mean, you look at some of the big English names that have came down to the, not English names, but names that have succeeded in the Premier League that have came down to Scotland and not done very well. I think Aaron Ramsey was one of them. Amad Diallo didn't do too well. I know he was younger than what he is now. And Joey Barton. I know I'm just thinking of Rangers players. I'm trying to think of another example. But
well, obviously one that I mean, look, it wasn't great up here, but a very established Premier League Championship player, Shane Duffy, came up to Celtic. He had an absolute horrible time at that season, but he's still a very capable defender.
Yeah, exactly. It's a weird league, as you said. Not everyone can adapt to it as well as others. So yeah, I would agree with your point. You can't be taking managers that have had Brendan Rodgers' success for granted.
Yeah, there was another goal before half time, and at this point, I really did just feel bad for St Johnstone. They had pretty much every player in the penalty box. I think it was Maeda still manages to score somehow. I mean, at this point, Ethan, I did wonder how many, and this is always the problem. Celtic look so good, they're 4-0 up, it probably could be 7 at that point. But again, it's right before half time. Celtic can just never seem to be able to get this little bit of time in between. It's sort of always in between half time that they always fire in goals. Whereas, I love to just see what Celtic can do against a team, if they have maybe 40 minutes, but they're in this sort of form and they're free flowing in goals, because it could be anything. But again, another decent goal from Maeda. And you've got to say, with all 4 of these goals, Fisher can really do nothing about any of them.
Yeah, I know. I think it was Balodis, the defender, who obviously I think he was the one who scored the goal the other week. I think he just gets caught with Celtic I think it was Dyson Maeda pressing him because Celtic were just, they smelt blood and wanted to get as many goals as they could before half time. And then Hatate has it again. You think he's maybe held on to it for too long. And then he eventually shifts it to Maeda, who doesn't really even have a chance. He just kind of shoots it through the crowd. And Fisher's blinded by the shot, and then it goes in. It's a good finish by Maeda. Another assist for Hatate, as you said, with the 33 goals for Maeda this season, 6 matches remaining. So you never know for the 40 club, which would be a ridiculous achievement for someone who's been a winger for a lot of the season. I know he's a striker. Well, he didn't even play striker today, did he? So, but yeah, and I think another stat I heard about him on the Premier Sports broadcast was he's got the most Scottish Cup goals. I don't know if this was for Celtic or in general. Most Scottish Cup goals in a season since Henrik Larsson. Henrik Larsson scored 9. Dyson Maeda has 7. So Maeda scores a hat-trick in the final, which at this rate you honestly wouldn't put against him. So yeah, it just shows the company that he's keeping this season. It's a remarkable season from him, and I think one that will be looked back on for years to come.
Yeah, well, we'll have a very Aberdeen happy fan in the comments. Paul writes, "Hi all, hope you've had a good weekend. Feel sorry for the St Johnstone fans having been on the wrong end of a big defeat in a semi-final against Celtic this season. I know exactly how they feel." And Paul's spot on. This isn't just, yes, we can always look at the positives as Celtic, but Paul's right. This happened to Aberdeen. It's now happened to St Johnstone. They've taken a big defeat, and when St Johnstone are trying to stay up and scrap for their lives, this really does not help their confidence.
No, not at all. And you see what happened to Aberdeen after that defeat. You maybe couldn't put it solely down to that, but Aberdeen's mid-season sort of implosion came right after that loss in the semi-final. And yeah, the mental implications of that are terrible, especially, as you mentioned, for a club like St Johnstone, bottom of the league. They've got a lot of work to do to get back in touching distance of the other teams, and results like this will certainly not help that. You take the belief of the result they got the other week against Celtic, and they feel like beating Celtic at home, you feel like on top of the world. You can beat anyone in the league on your day. and then you go and you're struggling, and by half time the game's done, and you're making subs. Balakari made 3 subs at half time just to get fresh legs on, it seemed, because St Johnstone were just dead and buried, and it was damage limitation at that point. So yeah, it's worrying times for St Johnstone now, because you could see them really going down under, just with the sort of off the back of it, because it's a really, really hard one to take, especially for the supporters that made the trip as well, because it's a terrible feeling. But yeah, that's what Celtic can do to you on your day. Yeah.
Paul says it's a bit of a worry that once Celtic get the league title tied up, they'll be able to rotate their squad and rest players in the build up to the final. But Aberdeen might have something to play for in the league right up until the last match. So our squad might be more fatigued. I mean, that is a good point. Once Celtic get this league title done, which I'm pretty sure will be at Tannadice, if not the game later. It's up to Celtic fans what one they prefer, to be honest with you. But it is scary that now Celtic can go, 4 or 5 games away for the final and not have to put out full strength teams, and they can keep these guys. And of course, these players will still play because you can't let them lose match sharpness. But Rodgers has a lot of players that he can fling in to try in different games, and that is a scary thing for someone like Paul. The final's coming up, and Paul will be happy to be in the final. After such a close game against Hearts, but Paul knows inside, you're coming up against a Celtic team that realistically right now seem to be pretty much unstoppable.
Yeah, I know. I definitely agree with Paul. It's a worrying time for Aberdeen fans, because even though they won yesterday, I think they would be the first to admit that they didn't play great. In a semi-final, in a final, it really doesn't matter. But Aberdeen, if you were to ask Aberdeen fans what they had a more realistic chance of doing, winning the Scottish Cup or getting third place, I think most of them would say getting third place in that automatic European spot. So Jimmy Talleen, quite rightfully, is going to fight for that until the last game of the season. Whereas Celtic, as you said, should be wrapped up by next weekend, and then Brendan Rodgers can experiment, maybe throw in some youngsters before, or at least I hope he does, because there isn't really much point in those games, because at the end of the day, Celtic have won the league and they are not playing for anything apart from the pride of playing for Celtic, which I think if you rotate a squad and you get players that are coming in hungry, especially young players, I think we always talk about it on here about giving young players the opportunity, and Celtic aren't very good for that as of late. So I would hope to see that, whereas Aberdeen have still got a very realistic chance at third, and they're going to push themselves to the limits to try and get that. So yeah, it was a really interesting point Paul made there.
Yeah, who's I forgot his name, the young player at Celtic, the striker, the one that was at Shamrock Rovers he was at last season?
Yeah, Johnny Kenny, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how much he plays in the last 5 games, because he has a decent prospect.
Exactly. I think it's a really strange one that he's not played a lot. I know Celtic want to finish the season strong, win the league, I understand all that, but I mean, he can't even get on the bench, and he must be thinking, I've went on loan to Shamrock, I've done brilliant in that league. Okay, it's the Irish league, but I done really well in the Conference League as well, and you'll be thinking, why can't I have just been loaned out again? I was going to pose the question actually to some fans in the league, and for other clubs in the league, whether they would take Johnny Kenny in January as a loan sign. I think St Mirren might have been, St Mirren actually might have been linked with him on a deadline day move.
I'm led to believe we were really close to actually getting him. I think it was just a case of waiting on Celtic potentially getting in a backup striker, which of course never happened. So it would have been interesting to see how we done, because it always feels like something that we need. Kenny feels like he can give you something that maybe we don't have up front, which is always a positive, and it can bring you a lot of goals as well. I think if you were to ask most clubs outside of Celtic and Rangers, they'd probably take him. Well, of course, Rangers aren't going to take a Celtic player, but you know what I mean, that type of player. I feel like he'd do well, especially down, sort of in the bottom half. Someone maybe like St Johnstone. St Johnstone are known for having the pacey strikers, Kimpioka, Sidibe, but having that guy that Kenny, that's a clinical finisher, could have really helped him this season. So I'm a bit gutted, to be honest, that we never got him. I don't know, maybe Celtic are going to look to loan him out next season. Who knows? And maybe we can try and take a punt at him again.
Yeah, I mean, you look at players like Ronan Hale. I know he was in the Northern Irish League, but he had a great scoring record there. Obviously, comes to the Scottish Premiership with Ross County. He doesn't have as great a goal scoring record, but he still contributed a lot of goals, 13 this season for Ross County. So that would definitely help it, as you said, almost any team in the league. But Celtic, it's just an embarrassment of riches, really, that he's not even getting on the squad. And then you've got like Sir Jude Bonner as well, who's had a few substitute appearances, and also Daniel Cummings, if he's still in the frame. I know he was linked away with a move to West Ham. I don't really know what happened with that though. But yeah, you just hope to see young players get a chance, because especially at a club like Celtic, it's a very, very rare occasion these days.
Yeah, starts at half time, 70% possession to Celtic, 14 shots, 6 on target. Obviously, 30% possession to St Johnstone, 0 shots, 0 on target. So it really does just sum up. And obviously, a player we've not even touched on yet, Cincialo in goals. As we get into the second half, obviously, there was a couple of things for him to do, but in terms of that first half, I mean, surely he just enjoyed the atmosphere in the sun, because St Johnstone gave absolutely nothing towards him.
Yeah, and I think Cincialo, I don't think his sort of spell being in the teams went too poorly. I think there was a few people worrying about him when he had to come in for Kasper Schmeichel, but I think he's a pretty capable goalkeeper. He done very. I think he got player of the season at, I can't remember what club, but I think it might have been Exeter. I want to say it was. I think it was an English League One club anyway, and he was in the team of the season maybe. So at the sort of the level, if you want to debate what level in England the Scottish Premiership's a comparison to, I think you'd probably say maybe lower Championship, upper League One. So I think he's going to be a capable goalkeeper at this level. But as you said, he did make one good save in the second half, which shows that he's still concentrated. He's not got the sunbed out and whatever. Although there was absolutely nothing he could have done about Mackenzie Cook's disallowed goal, because that was an absolute rocket.
Yeah, getting into the second half, then we'll dive straight into the goal. I thought against Celtic, I mean, I know St Johnstone made the triple sub. That to me was just Valakari looking to rest legs, knowing that next week, is the beginning of 5 really important games for his season. So, they bring a guy on like Mackenzie Cook, who scored after 54 minutes. It was always going to take, you felt, something just a wee bit magical to beat Celtic and score a goal, because they did just look that good. Like, in the Kilmarnock game, whether Danny Armstrong meant it or not, it did take something a bit out of the ordinary to get a goal. And it happened once again. Mackenzie Cook, I think it was about 25 yards, absolutely rockets one into the top left corner. And at that point, there's no much more you can say than it's just a good goal. Obviously, it does get chopped out for, I believe, a foul on Adamida in the build-up. But, I mean, on the goal, it was a great finish for Cook.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for St Johnstone, because it was one thing, if only, the only thing to cheer about in the game. But I think it was a foul on Adamida, unfortunately. But it was a world class strike from Mackenzie Cook, because I think Liam Scales, someone was telling me that Liam Scales defended it poorly, but I think Liam Scales is almost saying to him, he's surely not going to shoot from here, is he? And he does, and it's unsavable. You could have two goalkeepers in the goal, Schmeichel and Cincialo, and they were not getting anywhere near that. But yeah, it was unfortunate for St Johnstone. It just really summed up their day, I think.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of Carter Vickers' goal against Kilmarnock the other week. A lot of people were trying to blame, the Kilmarnock midfield specifically for not closing them down, but who in their right mind thinks that Vickers is going to hit that ball for there?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was just that's a goal of the season contender, that one. This one probably would have been, well, it's not in the Premiership, so I don't know if that means it's allowed in the goal of the season conversation, but yeah, it would have been up there because it was a ridiculous strike, but just not even a consolation because it didn't even count. But yeah, Mackenzie Kirk's showing his quality. I like him as a player, and I think if St Johnstone were to go down, which it's looking that way, I know they've still got a fighting chance, and I would like to see what he can do in the Premiership again. But I think if St Johnstone hold on to him, it'd be a great player to build their team around for the Championship next season.
Yeah, it was Balladis that I believe that fouled Ida in the build-up, and it nearly got worse for him because he bumped James Forrest to the ground around about the 60-minute mark. And I can't remember who the player was that first stuck the foot in. I don't think he makes contact with James, he sort of goes over him, and then Balladis sort of flings his arm into Forrest. For you, penalty or no penalty?
Yeah, I think it could have been a penalty, but it's not worth really sort of getting annoyed at it as a Celtic fan because, as you said, well, as we know, we're 4-0 up, but I think Balladis was a bit lucky there, but we'll let him off because he filled in the build-up to the goal and he also had a key part to play in the fourth goal for Celtic, so he didn't have the best afternoon, you could say. But yeah, I think he got off the hook there.
Yeah, obviously, as you said, it makes no impact. We can talk about, I'm sure we'll touch on it next Friday, the Hearts Aberdeen red card on Devlin. That's a very interesting topic. But in this game, when the circumstances are 4-0, it doesn't really matter. At this point, Celtic did make a triple switch. It was Kuhn, Jota and McEwen are on. That's scary that they can just bring on the three players. Forrest did and Engels went off, but before that, there was obviously something for Cincialo to do. I believe it was, I can't remember who was it Kirk that hit the shot?
Let me see, I'll try and find out for you.
Yeah, I think it may have been Kirk that hits a really nice snapshot, and it looks like it's getting in, but let's be honest, Cincialo makes a sensational save. It was a really nice save for Cincialo. Not having much to do, it's always difficult to sort of keep your focus on the game, but he done it tremendously well and tipped it right over the bar. And it was, to be honest, it's one of the moments where you go, aye, St Johnstone are probably never scoring in this game.
Yeah, I can't quite find out who that is, but if it was Mackenzie Kirk, we'll go with Mackenzie Kirk. But yeah, it just kind of shows that even when St Johnstone have got a shooting chance, that Celtic have got that quality, that their second choice goalkeeper is going to be able to pull off a save like that, and it shows the sort of the gulf and the quality between the sides. I mean, it is bottom of the league v top of the league, and usually they do play out like this. But that's why we watch football, and the off chance it doesn't, like it did a few weeks ago when St Johnstone obviously picked up that shock win. But lightning usually doesn't strike twice, and Celtic made amends for the result a fortnight ago.
Yeah, a couple minutes after the subs come on, Kuhn sends Alistair Johnson down the right hand side, calls it into the back post, and it's again pretty poor defensive work for St Johnstone, but look, taking nothing away for Jota, he comes on, he's hungry, he's looking for the goal, and he puts in a really nice half volley. It just sort of squeezes in the back of the net, and at that point it's 5. The Celtic maybe weren't as rampant as they were in the first half, but that's a really nice goal for Celtic. Again, it's good work for Celtic, especially Kuhn and Johnston, but again another poorly defended goal by St Johnstone.
Yeah, I mean, the cross is good from Johnston, but you think he's kind of overcooked it a little bit. But Jota does really well to sort of get a shot that's on target. But as you said, I think St Johnstone probably could have defended it a wee bit better. But I think they'll all be happy that it was only one goal they conceded in the second half. Because when you go in 4-0 down at the break, when the whole country of football is watching you on the sort of national stage of a Scottish Cup semi-final, then the last thing you want to do is be ultimately embarrassed. 5-0 is obviously not the best scoreline, but I think when it was 4-0 at the break, you were thinking the worst for them. So yeah, it was a really good goal from Jota. Not a really good goal, but it was a good goal from Jota. His 5th since his return. And Alistair Johnston, his 10th assist of the season. So he was showing obviously why he's in the team of the season, the players' team of the season. And I think he's well deserving of that.
Yeah. Moving on, St Johnstone did make one sub I'd like to touch on. Uke Piezo finally came on for St Johnstone. I do remember him for Hearts, but I don't think I remember him being as big as he actually is. He's compared to Valakari anyway. He's a really, really big guy.
Yeah, that was his first game for St Johnstone. I think I remember seeing him in squad lists and him being a St Johnstone player. But as you said, I don't remember him being that big. But in his days at Hearts, he never scored the most goals, but he was a dominant striker. And yeah, it was interesting to see him coming on, a little bit of a flash from the past, you could say, with that one.
He is very much the Scottish League's Akinfenwa type of player.
Yeah.
He's not fast at all, but he's just really, really strong. I suppose it's something that for the last 5 games, St Johnstone can maybe look at utilising. As I said earlier, St Johnstone tend to play with pace up front. Was very clearly the game plan for Valakari today. Try and put long balls over the top and let Sidibe run at Celtic's defence. But getting into the last 5 games, when you're playing against defences that they're not like Celtic, they're not as brave as maybe Celtic's backline is. They very much get the ball and just lump it straight back up the park. Having someone like a Kaiser who can just run about the sort of in behind defenders and try and win headers, it's something that they can use to their advantage.
Yeah, and I think going into the last 5 games of the season, I think St Johnstone will have the most of the possession in most of those games, if not all of them, with the way they play. Let me look at this. I'm going to get the stats up for possession stats in the Premiership, but I'd imagine St Johnstone will be towards the top with how they play or how they have played under Valakari this season. 5th. And I think the way they play is a lot of possession. They don't always do a lot with the possession, but I think when you're trying to break a team down that are being stubborn at the back, having someone like Ikpeazu to sort of lump the ball up to him when you've got a low block for him to win a knockdown or win a header or just put the ball in the net in any means necessary, then he's a good tool to have. But I think St Johnstone just have so many strikers. They've obviously got him, they've got Kirk, Sidibe, Kempioka, Nicky Clark is obviously, he's dropped back a little bit in his career, but he was still very much associated him being a striker. So yeah, they've definitely got options in that area. I'll definitely say I don't think St Johnstone have got the worst squad for any team to be relegated in recent years. I think they've got a pretty decent squad, and I don't know if I've said this on this podcast before, but I think if they do go down, I think Valakari, if they stick with him, I think he's got the tools to propel them back up, and I think it would be really interesting to see how he does in a championship environment where they'll have on paper probably the best squad in the league, and they'll have maybe the chance to play the sort of possession style football that they don't get to play in the Premiership because on paper they've got the worst squad in the league.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a St Johnstone team that probably the most confident I've felt that if a team goes down, they're going to come straight back up. Obviously Dundee United were heavy favourites to come up as well. But I look at St Johnstone, I look at the way they play, and that's a league in the Championship where they can really flourish. But just on that possession chart, I don't know if you still have it up, but I'm going to assume my team are probably 11th or 10th in that list.
Yeah, I'd guess that. Obviously, I'll get it back up. St Mirren 10th, actually.
Yeah. That surprises me.
Yeah, Motherwell and Ross County below. So yeah,
that's fair enough. I mean, we don't play with much possession, but back to the game. No too many more talking points to talk about, to be honest with you. Jota had a shot over the bar after some really nice passing and play. I did find it funny at the 90th minute, they sort of pan to both managers, and you're looking at Rodgers and he's so happy and you can see it. And Rodgers doesn't often show his emotion, but you can see he was happy. And then it pans to Valakari, and both the horns are just on the head, and he's just so deflated. I think that's maybe the first time he's looked at his team and really went, wow, we sort of showed nothing in this game, because let's be honest, St Johnstone didn't show a lot.
Yeah, they showed little to nothing. Of course, they had the ball in the net, but it was disallowed. I mean, two shots. They did obviously have one on target. But it's difficult for a team like St Johnstone, because Celtic, you would have anticipated that Celtic were going to be on the high after last week's result, and they were obviously going to want to inflict pain on St Johnstone, which is pretty nasty, I would say, because St Johnstone have had a pretty terrible season as it is. But getting to Hampden is a good achievement for St Johnstone, because they don't get there often, apart from when they won the double a few seasons ago. So yeah, their focus turns to survival now. It'll be difficult, but I just hope from a neutral point of view in the relegation scrap, I hope they win the first few games to make it interesting. Because if we've not got a title race, I at least want a relegation race, or a avoid relegation race.
Yeah,
You'll be enjoying that as well now, of course.
aye. You know what? I hope they stay up. I'm the same as you. I'm very much neutral in the sort of relegation battle now that we're not in it. But I look at St Johnstone, and I just think it would be so. I think it would be so good for the game, especially Scottish football. If the final day of the season, I don't know who St Johnstone have off the top of my head, but say they're travelling to Tynecastle or something, and
Home to Dundee in the last game of the season.
I mean,
that
that could.
Decider.
Yeah, I mean, we speak about our TV deals all the time, and just quickly, I mean, if Sky cannot pick up that game for the last game of the season, I mean, I don't know what they're doing. Anybody else, Viaplay or anybody like that, if no one picks up this game, I do not know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's been announced as well that they're not picking up any of the bottom half games, which
Brilliant.
I think just speaks volumes of the TV deal in this country, because of course Celtic and Rangers will bring in the most viewership, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Money. It's not the intentions of providing the games that mean the most, or are going to be the most entertaining to the Scottish Premiership season, which is unfortunate, but it's just the nature of the football world we live in now. We're no longer the working class game, I don't think.
Nah, it's very much a business game. 2 VR delays and a lot of substitutions. Yet, you know what? I fully credit the referee for giving no added time in this game. You had to get it over with. It was bad. It was a bad day for St Johnstone. Let's be honest, a 5-star performance for Celtic. Ethan, I'll give you the last word. A brilliant win for Celtic. Now you look ahead to the final on the 24th of May. You're playing Aberdeen. How are you feeling for
that? Yeah, obviously confident, but I can see it maybe being. I hope it is, because I like good football matches. I hope it is maybe a sort of similar result as what was it, the 2017 final, the 2-1 with Rogic, with that last goal, because I think that's one of the best Scottish Cup finals to recent memory. A lot of them have been one-sided Celtic wins, one-sided Rangers wins. That one was one that I remember as Aberdeen obviously took the lead through Johnny Hayes, then Celtic get the equaliser right after, and then Celtic get that late goal. So yeah, I'd love a sort of recreation for that, a real advert for Scottish football to end, which I think in the whole has been a pretty positive spectacle, Scottish football this season. I know we've not had a great title race, but in terms of the competitive nature across the league, I think it's been a good one. So yeah, I'm confident for that game, but it should be a good Scottish Cup final.
Yeah, and you've just brought back some really bad memories for Paul there. I can imagine how heartbreaking something like that is. I always remember the final. Can't remember. I think it might have been League Cup where you played Rangers and the Julian goal happened. That people still claim was offside. I remember watching that one with some Rangers friends, and they were very heartbroken after that one. But I love stuff like that. I think that was actually such a good game because obviously Rangers dominate, and then Celtic get the goal. But enough rambling. Thank you so much for joining us, Ethan. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
No, not any time. We should be back. Well, we'll be back on Tuesday for the show with Don Attenborough on Disabled Supporters Access in Scottish football. No European football anymore for the rest of the season, but we will be back on Friday to look ahead to the start of the fixtures and the split. It should be a really interesting one. But your full-time score at Hampden was St Johnstone 0, Celtic 5.
You're watching all the build-up and reaction. St Johnstone Celtic.